Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's special program hosted by the Arab American Center for Culture and Arts. I'm Wissam Sharafuddin, and I'm honored to be your host for this important conversation titled A New Era of Arab American Political Engagement. Joining me as a co host is the distinguished Ambassador Dr. Ali Ajami, a longtime advocate for justice and diplomacy, whose insight into international and domestic affairs adds depth to tonight's dialogue. Tonight, we have the privilege of speaking with a trailblazing leader whose work has inspired many, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. Dr. El-Sayed is a physician, epidemiologist, and a public servant who is now running for the United States Senate to fight for an economy that works for everyone, not just billionaires and corporations. Born and raised right here in Southeast Michigan, Abdul has dedicated his life to serving the people of the state. He rebuilt Detroit's health department after bankruptcy and later led Wayne County's Health, Human, and Veteran Services, serving 1.8 million residents. His efforts led to the cancellation of $700 million in medical debt for over 300,000 people, the removal of lead from school water systems, and the launch of a countrywide air quality monitoring network. All of us living in this area, we know Dr. Abdul very well. A proud union member and a graduate of the University of Michigan, Abdul earned his medical degree from Columbia on an NIH-funded fellowship and a doctorate from Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. He has spent his career fighting for healthcare, justice at home and abroad, and a government that truly puts people first. Dr. Sayed, welcome and thank you for joining us.
It's my honor and privilege to be with you, and thank you for taking the time this evening. I look forward to sharing thoughts and sharing the space with you.
Thank you. We'll start with the question of Arab American identity, a topic that is at the heart of our center. How has your identity shaped your journey into public service and politics?
Yeah, anybody who knows me knows that I'm deeply proud of my Arab American heritage. It's something that I wear proudly, and it's part of the broader fabric of our American identity. I was raised by my father, who is an immigrant from Alexandria, Egypt, and my stepmom, Jackie, who is a daughter of the American Revolution from literally right here in the middle of Michigan. And so, a lot of folks these days talk about code switching. I grew up code translating. And one of the things you come to appreciate across human experiences and cultural, faith, and ethnic backgrounds is just how much we share in common. I, in one summer, would go from a cottage on a lake in Montcalm County, Michigan, where my family's been for generations, to Alexandria, where my family's been for generations. And between the different sides of my family, these two groups of people couldn't have understood one another's lives and the ways that they engage their lives. But I got to walk seamlessly between them. And one of the things that I just came to appreciate deeply is that we all kind of want the same things. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how you pray, it doesn't matter where you come from. You want a great life for your kids. You want safety, you want security, you want joy, you want togetherness. And I think my experiences as what we call third culture kids, folks who bring a uncommon ethnic and or faith identity, is that you start to see those similarities across the differences. And then the other part of it is that for a long time in our country, our ethnic background has been, I hate to say it, but characterized by the worst things that a few people who shared our ethnic background might have done a long time ago. And one of the things that you have to do then, in a moment where folks have been taught to think that your ethnic identity might mean something different than what you mean, is it forces you to show your humanity even more. And so it's made me a much better communicator, because I know that, folks may come to a conversation with me with certain set of stereotypes about who I am and what I believe. And so my job is to spend time to show them that common shared set of goals, and to do that not in spite of, but because of, and coming from our background. And then the last point I'll say is there's just beautiful aspects to our faith background and our ethnic background. You think about ideals that we bring together: generosity and hospitality, and kindness and joy, and family. I mean, these are things that I think are universally celebrated, and they're captured in a unique way in our traditions. And I love to share that with folks in ways that we can. And in Southeast Michigan, everybody knows legendarily that our food is some of the best, and so that just opens a conversation for broader shared values, and I'm really grateful for that.
Okay, Doctor, welcome on board. Good evening first. As an Arab American running for high office today, what challenges Abdul Sayed has today what challenges we have in America today, and how have you navigated them?
Yeah, Dr. Ali, I really appreciate the question. And first, thank you for your service, bringing people together in the ways that you have. Look, whether you're an Arab American, you are a Black American, you are a white American, the biggest challenges we face in our country are faced by all of us. It's an economy that just fails working people, where we've focused more on the Fortune 500 than the fortunes of the 350 million of us in this country. We, despite being the richest, most powerful country in the world, we don't have guaranteed access to healthcare. When you take a big deep breath or you take a gulp of water, you worry about what's been put into that by some corporation as a function of an energy system that we have long since had the technology to rid ourselves of, that has us burning stuff out of the ground into the air and into our water. We can address these problems, but at core, we have a politics that allows the richest and most powerful to corrupt the system to buy access to power. And we've seen the consequences of that both here and in many of the countries that our families might have come here from, right? You think about the wars that have been fought because of the power of the weapons industry. You think about the impact that they have on our foreign policy. You think about the fact that, you look at any public school in America, and you could imagine all of the improvements that could come from millions of dollars invested in those schools. And instead, we're sending that money to foreign militaries abroad to just devastate people in places like Gaza. These are issues that we all face here at home, and those are the issues that all of us have to contend with. Now, I know that a lot of people will ask, well, Abdul, you're asking to earn the votes of the majority of your state, and your name's Abdul, and as we talked about earlier, our ethnic identity has been, there's been a concerted effort to cast aspersions about our broader intentions as a function of what our names are, how we pray. But I'll tell you, my whole life I've been Abdul, right? And I wish my whole name is Abdurrahman, as you all well know. And I took the moniker Abdul when I went to kindergarten in 1989, and it was a function of the fact that my name has sounds in it that most people don't know their throats can make. And so, when I was going to kindergarten, my stepmom was like, this might be a little bit of a tough name. I started kindergarten in Missouri. And so at that point, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had just retired from basketball, and Paul Abdul was topping the charts. And so they said, maybe we'll go by Abdul. And so I've been Abdul since then. But I was Abdul when I was elected captain of my high school football team by people who didn't look like me. I was Abdul when my coaches gave me a coach's leadership award. I was Abdul when I walked into clinics and hospitals and asked that central question that doctors ask, which is what's wrong and how can I help, to patients, most of whom didn't look like me. I was Abdul when I rebuilt Detroit's health department. I was Abdul when I led Wayne County's health department. I was Abdul when I earned 340,000 votes the last time I ran for governor. And so I know that this state is big enough and honest enough, and is looking and searching enough to see past a name and what they've been told that name represents to the person who sits underneath that name. And I'm taking a bet on the goodness of the people in our state.
Thank you, Doctor. And, sometimes our names, we find it throughout our life that sometimes we become a reflection of our name. And your name translates to the servant of the most compassionate. And your area of work is mostly compassion, has, is a big word in it. I want to ask you about your your involvement in the Arab American as an Arab American in this movement. Do you see your campaign as part of a larger movement of Arab Americans asserting their political power in the U.S.? And what do you say to the young Arab Americans who are hesitant to enter politics due to fear of discrimination or backlash, or they feel they don't have enough background or qualifications to move forward and serve?
Wissam, I appreciate the question. I'm running in the same vein, in the same ethic as anyone who's ever run for office in this country before, with the notion that as an American, I believe that I have an opportunity to listen and learn from my fellow Michiganders about the challenges they face, and I aim to serve based on what they share. And I think I recognize that as an Arab American, I offer and I bring to this conversation a unique perspective, but I see that as part of a far broader perspective that's shared by all of us. I do think that it's important, though, that in our politics, no matter who you are, where your family came from, what your name might be, that you feel like you can be included in these United States of America. And that's one of the most beautiful things about our country. And so I hope to bring my whole self to this. And I encourage anyone out there, Arab American or not, to recognize that the things about you that may seem different at first also give you a new perspective on this broad pluralistic society of ours that is America. And I think as an Arab American, I have something unique to offer. But I also know that all stripes of Americans bring something unique to that table. And my hope is to be able to come together with the 99 other senators, should I be elected, to bring what I've got, my perspective together, to be able to move this country to its highest ideals. And I'll tell you this, my parents come from a place where there was no democracy. There still is not democracy. And when I asked my dad what he thought about my potentially running, he told me, Abdurrahman, you have to. I said, why is that? And he said, well, for 46 years since I came here, I took for granted that I could say anything about anyone to anyone, and I wouldn't have to worry about the walls having ears. And you all know what I mean by that, right? Mm-hmm. That I could talk about politics in any place and nobody would say anything to me because I have freedom of speech. And he said, for the first time in this country, I worry about that. And I worry that my granddaughters, your kids, or my grandsons, your brother's kids, are going to grow up in a place where that's no longer true. And so, in some respects, people want to say that, as an American of Arab heritage, that somehow people like us don't respect our democracy. No, we actually deeply value it because we know what it's like to be in places where that democracy doesn't exist. And so, we fight for our ability to be able to say and to believe and to engage just like every other American, because that's what the Constitution guarantees all of us. And we've seen this administration in effort to rip apart the Constitution if people decide to use their speech in ways that the president doesn't like. And that to me is an anathema. And that feels a lot more like Egypt than it does like America. And, my parents came to America for a reason. I'm an American. I believe we have certain inalienable rights, and I aim to fight for them. And I know that thousands, millions in my state want those rights fought for. And so together we can come together and build something that's greater than the sum of the parts, which is what America is in the first place.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor, for saying this. And as my colleague Wissam said before, that you have our support, our personal support, and we would love to see you in the Senate. Let me ask you this. What specific policies or issues you believe they are most important to our Arab American community in Michigan today?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time in the Arab American community, and our issues are kind of the same as everybody else's. The number of Arab American folks working on the line in the auto industry and the parts industry across the state, they're worried about whether or not they're going to have quality union representation. They're going to be able to get a fair wage for the work that they put in. They send their kids to schools that they see are crumbling. They worry about whether or not they'll be able to have health care. They worry about whether or not, especially you go to Salina School, for example, sits downstream of a smokestack from a large corporation. They worry about whether or not their kid's going to have another asthma attack. They worry about whether or not they're going to be sent in to bankruptcy or medical debt for taking that kid to the hospital, to the emergency room because they can't breathe. I mean, these issues are not unique to us, but they are fundamental because, like all of us, we live and work in this economy, and we struggle to be able to afford basic needs, basic groceries. And there are also, as we think about it, there is a responsibility that our country has as the first among equals in the world. And I think for a lot of Arab Americans, there is a level of attention paid to what our country does abroad because we have loved ones in other places. And you think back to that question about the quality of schools. It's a crazy thing that in this country we fund foreign militaries that break basic human rights law, right? And I start with Egypt. I spent, like I said, a lot of my childhood summers in Egypt, and I can tell you every single dollar we spend funding the Egyptian military doesn't make Egyptians any richer or any freer. It just cements the chokehold that a dictatorship has on its people. And that is true whether you're talking about Egypt or you're talking about Jordan or you're talking about Saudi Arabia or you're talking about Israel. And so I think we have a responsibility to hold our country to its highest ideals, that is our taxpayer money. We deserve to spend it on our schools and in our communities. And where it is corrupting other people's policy, I think we have a responsibility to stand up and call that out. At the same time, right, we spent a lot of time, anybody who's a student of American history knows that our country spent a lot of time, a lot of people put a lot of effort into building what we call a rules-based international order and working as first among equals with other countries in the world to create multinational organizations that would hold accountable countries that would violate international law. And where we have operated within those rules, we've made really, really good decisions. That starts with World War II, and that includes things like our engagement in Serbia, for example, to protect people from genocide. But where we have violated that, whether that was in Vietnam or Iraq or now Israel, right, that is when we make terrible decisions. And so I think that we recognize fundamentally the connection between what our country does at home, our failure to invest in our schools and our healthcare, and what our country does abroad, funding war machines in other countries. And I would rather, and I think almost every other Arab American, frankly, every other American, doesn't matter if you're Arab, Black, white, American, would rather us be spending that money here investing in our children than giving it to foreign militaries to drop bombs on other people's children and their schools and their healthcare centers.
Thank you, Doctor. In the first vote that entered the Senate for ceasefire in Gaza, 100 senators voted no on ceasefire out of 100. While at the same time, 67% of American public polled was with ceasefire. And that shows a huge discrepancy between the Congress and the people. You've been vocal about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Do you believe that your presence in the Senate will correct the path of the American government to be more true to its values, true to its constitution, true to its founding values, and standing against genocide, standing against the breaking of the international laws that's taking place? And do you feel the current path makes the United States complicit in the genocide that's taking place in Gaza? Keeping in mind that you will be next to people that are in Senate that are very misinformed, that can have positions that are shocking. I'll give you an example of this recent tweet of one of the senators who has called a representative in Congress as Muslim terrorist. CAIR has strongly condemned his statement today.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's unacceptable. Anybody advocating for starvation as a weapon of war simply doesn't actually understand international law nor basic human decency. And I want to be clear, it's not, it's this. I aim to be a proponent of a engagement with the world that would call us to our highest ideals anywhere in the world, right? And I think when folks think about this current moment, obviously Gaza is such a bleeding wound on the world, right? That it's difficult to disentangle how one would apply their principles anywhere. And certainly when it comes to Gaza, I would and have advocated for ceasefire, and I haven't hesitated to call it what it is. At the same time, though, I want to be clear that like wherever in the world we are watching people oppress other people, leveraging our tax dollars to do it, you can count on me to stand up against that. I just do not believe that it makes you strong to inflict pain on other people. I think it makes you strong to stand up against the infliction of that pain, and to stand up for the well-being of children, to stand up for basic human rights. I think we are the best in the world as Americans when people see us doing those things. And so I am going to be a proponent of peace. I'm going to be a proponent of justice. I'm going to be a proponent of our country following a rules-based international order in Gaza and any other place in the world. And that's what I think people want to see, is that you apply your principles anywhere and everywhere. And I think that's a real responsibility for us. I mean, it's I say this because I think it's easy for somebody to argue that somehow one's advocacy around Gaza simply has to do with a shared language that you might speak with people in a different country. But I also want to be clear about like Saudi Arabia's engagement in Yemen, right? I want to be clear about the kinds of human rights abuses that we see inflicted in Sudan on the part of the UAE. Like all of that is wrong. And I think we have to be willing to stand up and bring our principles always to these conversations and ask, what is in the best interest of humanity? And how do we make sure that the money we spend funding our government is spent to protect the vulnerable, not to inflict pain on them?
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Let me ask you this. What about the Arab American community? How do you describe it? United, divided? And what about the Arab American and Muslim American pacts like AIPAC? How do you describe them? How do you see them?
So I think our community, like many other communities, is both beautiful and searching, right? I think community is not a concrete thing. It's a very dynamic and constantly reforming thing. And I think we have, in a moment of profound pain, really tried to search and ask, how do we come together in this very, very difficult, challenging moment? And I've spent as my whole life, my whole adult life, and most of my childhood in the Arab American community here in Michigan. We have a very, very diverse community. You have a strong, large Lebanese community, a large Yemeni community, a large Iraqi community, a pretty sizable Palestinian community, a relatively small Egyptian community, and many other types of Arab Americans as well. And one of the beautiful things about this community is that folks come together not just around a shared identity, but also around shared principles. And, obviously, whenever you come together with any group of people, like think your own family, there's not always going to be points of a full 100% agreement. But there is a question of like, what is the shared purpose? And wherever I go in the Arab American community, the questions that are asked have less to do with what's in the best interest of Arab Americans specifically, but what is our responsibility to the broader American ideal? Right? And how is it that we can bring our own perspective to calling our country to be better, right? To be better to our neighbors who may look like us or not look like us, to be better to our global neighbors. And I see a community working together to try and ask those questions. And when we see our country making really terrible decisions, there's a real responsibility to stand up and ask, okay, how can we do better? And what does that look like? And you may make mistakes in that process, but I think the intentions are what really matter. And I see a community really working hard to try and both come together, but also to come together more broadly around the ideals that our country holds dear, and around making sure that in our public policy that we reflect those ideals.
What about the Arab American and Muslim American pacts?
Look, I think these are organizations coming together to try and ask, how do we stand up to the power of PACs that too often have led our country astray. You look at the power of an organization like AIPAC, AIPAC, and this is a political action committee funded in large part by MAGA billionaires that is trying to dictate who wins and who loses Democratic primaries, right? And I think you've got other organizations who are saying that's not fair and that's not right. And we need to come together to protect the people who the AIPAC in particular tends to try and defeat. And they may organize around particular ethnic identities because, well, the candidates that they tend to, the AIPAC tends to go after, tend to be from certain communities. But a lot of this really has to do with, do we want Republican money, right? MAGA money, deciding who wins Democratic primaries? And if our answer is no, then you've got to try and push back.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm going to ask a question you probably don't get asked often, because this is a topic that is usually ignored by most media. And also responding to the comments that we're getting, they align with this same topic. Many progressive movements, including some Arab Americans, have turned to the third parties like the Green Party. Why do you think most Arab American candidates still run as Democrats rather than exploring alternative parties? And do you see that the Green Party as a viable platform for Arab Americans, or do you believe that change is better achieved by reforming the Democratic Party from within? And by the way, I know that in Michigan, the Green Party allows for the Green Party to endorse candidates who align with its values, even if they're not in the Green Party. And I know that you are, your endorsement is being discussed by the Green Party of Michigan.
I'm focused on winning the Democratic primary, and I can tell you why. I'm old enough to remember voting for Barack Hussein Obama in 2008. And I, like so many Americans, was excited to vote for him because he was a Democrat who understood that the soul of the Democratic Party was against dumb wars. And I don't know what happened over 17 years, but it seems like we'd forgotten that. I've read my history, and I know that throughout its history, the Democratic Party was the party that stood with labor. The Democratic Party was the party that understood that you needed to make sure that people could earn a fair wage, working a reasonable amount of time, and being able to support their families on a single paycheck. I remember the Democratic Party fighting for guaranteed health care for everybody. And so I just want the Democratic Party to be the Democratic Party again. And so, look, do I think there are people who have a D next to their name that would rather the Democratic Party be more like the Republican Party? Yeah, I think so. And I think we have a responsibility to call Democrats to be Democrats again. And that's the kind of race that I'm running. And for that reason, I think both that I align with where the party has been in its history and where it needs to be again. And I'm hoping to call the party back to its essential identity as the party that stands against war, that stands with working people, that stands with government doing good things in society. And I think it can be won back. I'm not willing to give the party up to people who want it to be the party of war or the party of corporate interests, or the party that pretends to care about all people, but ultimately really only caters to the richest. I'm not willing to give that up, and for that reason, I believe that there's a real responsibility for us to hold the party accountable to its highest ideals, just like our goal is to hold our country accountable to its highest ideals, because we love the country, right? And I think, when you do something like this, it's an act of hope and it's an act of love. And sometimes, love has to be tough. Love has to be honest. And I think for all of us, we think about the people we love most. They were people who were the most honest with us, and were willing to tell us hard truths. And, I'm trying to tell the party some hard truths about what it takes to win back power from the likes of Donald Trump. And that means being willing to see people's pain, speak truth to power, but also deliver policies, policies that this party has long understood were both winning policies and, more importantly, critical policies for the well-being of people in this country, to deliver those both back under the party platform, but also deliver them to a country that's really in pain right now.
Thank you. I'll leave the final question to Dr. Ali.
Okay, Doctor, just one more question to go. And, it's not a secret that most of the new generation, the new Arab Americans, are so hesitant these days to enter politics due to fear of discrimination or backlash. What Dr. Abdul Sayed would advise them, how to make them come out of this fear.
I understand why people are afraid. I do, and I, in my in some moments, I'm not gonna lie, I wonder like, what will this mean for me and my family? But I also know that there are so many more people who live in fear of not being able to afford their home or their groceries, or whether or not they're going to lose their job tomorrow, or whether or not they're going to be able to see a doctor if their kid gets sick. And when I think about them, I realize that it really is not about me. It's about whether or not I'm willing to give what I have to fight for people who don't have the opportunities that I do. And I say that as a grandson of my teta Soad, who lost two babies before their first birthday of 8 to whom she gave birth, and the son of my father who lost his two siblings before he turned 5 years old. I on those summers in Egypt came to understand just how accidental my life in America was, and what my life might have been like if I wasn't born here. And I love what America did for me. I love America, but I also ask and can't help but be frustrated by the fact that America didn't do that for a lot of people in America, right? Whether you're talking about rural folk or urban folk, there are a lot of folks who never got the opportunities that I got. And I think, what is the responsibility of opportunity? It's to create opportunity for other people. And so, for anybody out there who understands what their opportunities mean and understands what it means to fight for both their opportunities and opportunities for people who don't have them, I think we have a responsibility to stand up. And I know, to me, that reassurance comes from a faith in God, in this country, in each other, in our ability to bring numbers, to reinforce and reassure one another that we're on the right path. That if we are willing to be peaceful warriors for justice, that we can make our country better. And that's why I got into it. That's why I hope other people get into it. We got so much to offer, and it's not about us. It's about all of us. It's about our country. It's about what we do for one another here. It's about what our country means to other people abroad. It's about making this a more peaceful, a more just, a more sustainable world. And I think politics is one avenue to do that. There are many others, right? But I think, a life well lived is a life where you ask, how can I leverage the opportunities and the skills that I have to make life better for other people? I began my career thinking I was going to do that as a doctor. And I came to realize that the things that were making people sick had a lot more to do with the politics happening outside of a clinic or a hospital, which is what led me here. And we all have our own paths to walk. We all have our own way to make the world a better place. You all are doing it by sharing conversations like this. And for folks who feel like, maybe I want to enter the political arena, I hope that you'll look at the people around you and ask, what can I do to serve? And that you'll find ways to serve.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. When we look at Dr. Abdul today, we see a Thomas Paine who once stirred the conscience of a nation against tyranny and taxation without representation, is a new face of these American revolutionaries, American founding fathers, and true American people who held true American ideals. Abdul today challenges a system that has long ignored the voices of working families, immigrants, and others. So he represents a new generation of children of the American Revolution, not by blood, but by belief, by the belief that liberty and dignity, well, partly by blood too, but by the belief that liberty, dignity, and equality are not slogans, but sacred promises. Thank you for fighting on behalf of all of us to restore these promises, to return America to the ideals it professes, government by the people, for the people, and accountable to all the people. This is not just a campaign. It is, we see it as in the Arab American Center for Culture and Arts as a call of Arab American conscience and it's our moment to answer this call. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us, and thank you for all of you who are watch today. You can share this conversation with others, and more to come with Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Good night.